doing foreign languages helped me, for example, to get that placement in Madrid.
The benefit of an example for others.
Many clients I'm able to secure in Latin America because I'm able to speak their language.
Take any profession, pick any profession in the world, just imagine. Take that profession and now add the prefix.
If it is, I tended to hit you, but I hit the person behind. The fact that I didn't intend to hit that person, nonetheless, is that transferred malice onto that person. Being able to, under pressure in court, recall a particular authority with ease is definitely a skill. One thing I was working on recently was a tax appeal, where it spoke about a certain VAT treatment that should apply when an agent.
This is one thing I usually love to share with foreign languages.
What at the time seemed like a source of huge disappointment turned out to be a blessing in disguise.
All right, so good day, everybody. Hope everybody is well. This is Jason from Jabe Language Services here again. I have a brand new guest, an old friend who I didn't even realize how old of friends we were. His name is Jivaan Bennett. Jivaan, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for lending us the time, your expertise to be able to share with us the benefits of languages. Thank you for being here.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here, Jason. I finally got my chance to have my 15 seconds of fame, so merci beaucoup.
That's all right, more than 15 seconds. Okay, so the first off, in doing this type of meeting people and discussing people, I remember talking with a friend, Chantel, in a previous interview. She told me that we hadn't seen each other in 18 years. And I don't think it's been that long for us, but I realized that we didn't, what I thought was our first meeting was actually many years after our first interaction.
Indeed.
So I think we'll share that with our viewers here, right? So I thought that my first time meeting you would have been around 2005, 2006. When I was teaching English to some foreigners, Guadeloupeans, Martinicans, who were here on vacation in Trinidad in Bishop's College during the August vacation. I thought that was the first time we interacted. But you actually told me that we would have crossed paths even before that.
Correct.
So share a bit of that.
Yeah, so I remember you being one of the very few young men who were doing French, I think French and Spanish, if I'm not mistaken, in Form 6. So you would have been in lower 6. When I was in Form 1, we both shared our time at St. George's College in Barataria many moons ago. So yes, I do remember. Yeah, I think if I remember correctly, you were one of the prefects as well at St. George's College. But there were very few men who were doing foreign languages at that time. So yeah, you definitely stood out as one of the very few. And I mean, that in turn inspired me to consider going on doing foreign languages later on, which is what I ultimately did in secondary school. So yeah, so thank you.
Yeah, well, I didn't realize I was actually having that sort of an impression. I'm glad to hear that it's possible, and even here that what I'm trying to do and create is to create examples, especially as you mentioned, for men in terms of foreign language and the benefit of foreign language, where we see that men can do languages and can make a career out of languages. So that I think we're going to get into now, right? So you mentioned St. George's College, and me being an influence to you. I think you would have gone on to be an influence to many others. So can you tell us a bit of how your experience with foreign languages was in St. George's College?
Well, I was really fortunate to end up in St. George's College, first of all. I remember throughout my time in primary school, I probably like your classic overachievers, doing very well in common entrance mock exams, scoring very well as SEA now. Sorry for those who are, I'm showing my age here. But yeah, so I was, doing really well, and I thought I would pass for my first choice, which was Presentation College, Shogunas. And if not, my second choice, which was Hillview College. And lo and behold, to my surprise and utter disappointment at the time, I passed for my third choice. This school I'd never heard about before. Was not, at least I thought, it was not a prestige school. And it was a real blow to my self-esteem as an 11-year-old
Right.
to pass for this school called St. George's College that I'd
Right.
never heard of. But God really does work in mysterious ways.
True.
It turns out that I did have a talent and an interest in foreign languages. And my first and second choice were schools that didn't actually teach French at the very least, up to Form 6. I think neither Hillview and nor Presentation College at that time taught French at Form 6. I think they did Spanish up to Form 5. And I was fortunate to go on, thanks to excellent teachers at St. George's College,
Right.
to get an open language scholarship.
Right.
So had I passed for one of these two schools, very unlikely I would have gone on to get a language scholarship.
Yes.
And that I think has definitely shaped a lot of my career since. So, what at the time seemed like a source of huge disappointment turned out to be a blessing in disguise.
Well, funny that you say blessing, because as you're saying that, I'm hearing how sometimes, God works in mysterious ways. And you were thinking at the time that St. George's College might be a disappointment. But I remember I would have done my O-levels in Woodbrook Secondary. And one of the reasons I tried to get to St. George's College for my A-levels is because that they told me at the time that was the best secondary school in the country in terms of foreign languages.
Yeah.
So there was literally no place better to go for foreign languages at that time than St. George's College. So, whereas I was looking at St. George's as this great achievement, it's funny that you might at the time, as you said, as an 11-year-old, thought of it as a bit of a disappointment, but really and truly it ended up being for something better. So you mentioned getting an open scholarship.
Yes.
And as a result, you would have started your university studies in England with a year in France thrown in for good measure.
Yeah.
So tell us a bit about that and that.
Well, yeah, I was very fortunate to get a scholarship. I say fortunate, but there was a lot of hard work. And I don't just mean hard work by me, but I really am grateful to my mom, first of all, who made huge sacrifices, not just of her time, but financially, to allow me to go to various extra lessons.
Right.
And then I had excellent teachers at St. George's College, so big up to the Ganpats. I think they're retired by now.
For sure.
But yeah, Mr. and Mrs. Ganpat, Miss Horsham, Miss Blandin, Dr. Campbell on the French side, Dr. Campbell, excellent teacher. At Madame Taylor as well for French, and also Mr. Crespo, the legendary Mr. Crespo as well for Spanish. So I was really fortunate to have some really great teachers, and it was just something I really enjoyed at the time. I had the opportunity to spend a summer in Peru.
Okay.
Between Form 4 and Form 5, and then also in Isla Margarita, I think in between Form 2 and Form 3.
Okay.
But, those experiences really helped me to be interested in foreign languages, so that I went off to university and did law. I wanted to do foreign languages for my degree. And a close family member, who will remain nameless, said, very derisively, what will you do with that? Do you plan to be a secondary school teacher? Which I didn't think was a bad option at the time. But my family was adamant that, sure, you can do that, but not on our dime, if you want to go off and do foreign languages. And I think to a certain degree, I don't regret my choices now, because I was able to do French law as well as English law.
Right.
But looking back, there's so many options that you can do a degree in French or Spanish or whatever foreign language and still have a career in a different area, whether that's, what you wanted to do initially or not.
Yes.
So for me, I went on to do law, English law and French law, and I practice now up to today in the UK. In London, so I'm an attorney at law here in Trinidad, but also a barrister in the UK. And it's definitely a job that requires a lot of hard work, but your foreign languages do come in extremely helpful, and happy to share a bit more on that.
For sure, because what your nameless family member would have mentioned, I think is the core and one of the driving motivators for what we're doing today, which is that people, I think, mistakenly think, why study a foreign language? Why pursue a career in foreign languages? if not to just teach in a secondary school, or as you said, not that there's anything wrong with that, but hopefully we are starting to show people that there are so many other areas of work that exist that you can access because of or thanks to foreign languages. So somewhat similar to me, you would have used foreign languages to branch off into law. I think I did a little less branching off into law than you, although I did a master's in law and languages.
Lucky you.
For sure. But I am truly fascinated by law, so I'm really glad that now I'm getting to talk to somewhat of a like mind in terms of law and languages. So one thing I'd like to ask, what are some of the ways that you think languages kind of help you or strengthen your knowledge or your understanding or interpretation of something like law?
It shows up in so many ways. So ultimately, I think law to a certain degree could be viewed as a form of communication.
Yes.
It's a way of communicating society's values at an extremely high level. If we want to be philosophical about it, if you look at the laws in place at times, it can reflect what society considers to be important.
Right.
So if you take, for example, some of the case law that in the US that originated around slavery, at one point, slaves were treated as property, right? And the law actually codified that, and that represented, So you may remember some of those cases from your legal studies. And, the law, as it moves on, it shows how the law represents society's changing views. So in 1991, for example, Aaron Brown was first recognized that within the context of a marriage, a man can still rape his wife, and that is criminalized and ought to be viewed as such. So for me, I think when I look at it as from that lens, it's no different from communication. Whereas in a foreign language, you're seeking to communicate an idea to someone. You can view law to some extent like that. So I think from that perspective, there are the similarities. Conceptually, we learn in foreign languages, this word has this meaning in a different language. So bonjour, means hello. The cafe, coffee. Well, actually, we learn authority. So we learn, this particular case was decided, and it's authority for a certain proposition in law that, it may be, for example, the case of Latimer, Aaron Latimer, is a case about transferred malice. That if it is, I intended to hit you, but I hit the person behind, the fact that I didn't intend to hit that person, nonetheless, is that transferred malice onto that person. I'm still liable. So there are different authorities, and when you're learning law, you'd learn the authorities and what the propositions are for. And then the final way how I think foreign languages really impact on something day-to-day for me, other than being able to communicate with some of my clients in their native language, which is extremely helpful. A lot of the law that we draw from in the UK comes from EU law. At one point, EU law was sovereign to domestic law. And within the CARICOM framework, we have a similar setup constitutionally, where CARICOM law, in theory, sits above the national law. A lot of the cases that we review in for me, I do a lot of tax law. So a lot of the tax law cases specifically related to VAT, those come from the EU jurisdictions, and sometimes the original language is in French. And when there's that translation to English, for someone who doesn't speak the language, there's certain nuances that can be missed. And I'm happy to give you an example of something I worked on recently, where my knowledge of French law came in particularly useful. So I would say those in summary would be three areas off the top of my head, I would say, where foreign languages and law, where they intersect. There's, like I said, a philosophical level where it's communication effectively of society's values. Also looking at it in terms of your day-to-day work, it also is quite useful, but also in learning law, understanding authorities, and in the same way you learn vocabulary in a foreign language.
Okay, wow, that's crazy and interesting. One thing that I'm listening, and you're talking about French law and how your knowledge of French law would have helped you, tell us a bit about your year in France. First off, not just the learning of law in different languages. I think that people who are not familiar with the legal field, what they may not understand is that law in France and law in the UK is not the same.
No.
Law in the UK and law in Trinidad is not the same. So although I made a joke with someone recently where I was trying to assert my Fifth Amendment rights, we hear that all the time on television in the US, but that is something that is particular to the US. We do not have a Fifth Amendment here in Trinidad. So tell us a bit about your experience in France and how that might have helped to broaden your knowledge and your understanding, not only of language but of law.
I mean, my year in France for me was transformative. It was by far the most difficult year of studies for me. It was my annus horribilis if I had to have one, right, during my years of studies. But at the same time, the way they approach learning in France is quite different from the UK. So whereas in undergrad at King's College, where I did my degree in English law, we'd be invited to answer a problem question, applying our knowledge of the law, but then also critique the law. How do we think the law should evolve? What do we think are some of the things that are lacking in the way in which the law is structured? By contrast, at undergrad level in France, law is an exercise in memorization. You had to memorize the law and, as we'd probably, pejoratively say, spit the law back out onto your exam paper, word for word, you're expected. And I think there are pros and cons to both methods. It definitely strengthened my ability to recall, which is really helpful as a lawyer. Being able to, under pressure in court, recall a particular authority with ease is definitely a skill. And I think I draw from my time studying French law to be able to do that. By contrast, I think critiquing the law is extremely important. So now I lecture part-time at UE and also at King's College, my alma mater. And one of the key things that we try to get our students to understand, both at undergrad and postgrad level, is the need to not see and learn the law for what it is, but what it could be. How could the law evolve? What changes should we make? Do we agree with the judges? I mean, because they're judges doesn't mean that they're infallible. How would we approach things differently? And I think that those are skills that you get from studying law, particularly in the UK, where it's very much expected that you would not only know the law, what it is today, but how it should be. And I think those two skills marry each other very well.
Okay. Wow, that's and when I hear you talking about cachet to spit in French, that carries me back as well to some of the good and not so good times of studying in France and their expectations. And it made me think as well how you mentioned the fact of having to recall, where in one aspect you may think teachers just expect their students to memorize and basically parrot is another word we use, to mimic exactly what they would have given us and repeat it word for word. Whereas that is actually strengthening a skill. I think of my field in terms of translation and proofreading and that sort of thing. Like sometimes I may work on a document and I can remember a specific word or term that might have been dealt with 30 pages before, and because of being able to recall and remember, I know I can appreciate that skill and how it may serve me beneficially today. Okay, so now let's talk a bit about your current field of work. So you mentioned being a lawyer, being a barrister, as well as being a teacher. Tell us a bit about how foreign language is involved in the day-to-day. You mentioned it a bit, but if you can share it in a bit more depth, as well as how you think foreign language assists you or benefits you in such a way where someone who is in your position who may not have studied foreign languages may not have that type of benefit that you have.
Yeah, I mean, foreign languages definitely helped me a lot in terms of, just to give you a view of what I do now. So I, after studying in the UK, returned to Trinidad. I was studying on a scholarship, so I had to return to give my national service, which I did for 3 years, as I was required to by my contract. And during that time worked in Trinidad before returning to the UK to study. While there, I got a job with one of the Magic Circle firms. So I worked for a firm called Linklaters, one of the top 5 more prestigious and older law firms, international law firms, but with headquarters in London. And while I was there, I founded the firm's Caribbean group.
Okay.
I realized we just didn't have any team representing the Caribbean interests, and we worked very closely with the Latin American team.
Right.
So already I was able to put my knowledge of Spanish into use to be able to communicate with that team, and also to work together with them on joint client mandates.
Right.
So there are a number of clients that were seeking to invest in the Caribbean from Latin America, and being able to communicate with them in foreign language helped. I then spent 6 months as a trainee in the Madrid office.
Okay.
Probably my best 6 months as a solicitor. Really enjoyed it, living in Madrid. Would go back there in a heartbeat. I think it's like the equivalent of Trinidad in Europe. There's so many similarities between the Spanish and Trinidadians, I would say, culturally.
Right.
And again, it was really interesting. I worked on a really high-profile restructuring matter. So this financial restructuring where a company is unable to pay its debts.
Right.
It will go back to its lenders, to the banks that have lent it money, and try to restructure that debt.
Yes.
And being able to speak Spanish, I was able to work on that matter in Spanish.
Yes.
And draft documents, negotiate documents, all in Spanish. So that really helped a lot, having that knowledge. We don't learn technical legal jargon in A levels, but it's something, if you do have the base already from your Cape days or from the university, you can very quickly pick up the right vocabulary.
Right.
So that was really helpful. Since then, so I spent about 8-9 years at that law firm.
Okay.
And now I've branched off and started my own practice independently in London.
Okay, congratulations.
So thank you very much. It's only been, 6-7 months.
Okay.
But going really well so far. Again, I still have quite a huge base of clients from Latin America. I previously worked on an arbitration, so that's a form of dispute resolution, where you avoid going to courts and it's not in the public domain. And that was in Portuguese, but again, having the knowledge of Spanish, I was able to read and understand the documents.
Yes.
So that came in really helpful in my day-to-day work. One thing I was working on recently was a tax appeal, and a lot of it centered around the decision of the Court of Justice of the European Union.
Right.
And it gave a ruling where it spoke about a certain VAT treatment that should apply when an agent disposed certain assets, right?
Yes.
And for those who are non-language speakers, disposed, the false friend, right? It sounds as though it means dispose of. But actually in this context, it means to own or to hold, right? So if that person holds the assets as opposed to disposes of the assets.
Which is the actual opposite.
The opposite, exactly.
Yeah.
So everyone was reading it and, looking at it from the meaning of to dispose of the assets, which actually was quite unfavorable for our client. And I looked it over and fortunately was able to find the original text in French as opposed to the English translation. I was able to identify this difference, which in the end was quite helpful for our case. And we were able to be successful on that particular point. So I think having foreign languages, for me, there's tangible benefits to it.
For sure.
I do use my French day to day. I think at a broader level, if I could just probably sneak in one additional point, beyond using it to understand the meaning of words on a page, I think understanding the cultural norms and understanding how different cultures operate in a legal context,
definitely,
that is particularly helpful. So the way in which deals are negotiated, the way in which documents are drafted in a civil law context. So the French, very known for their Code Napoleonique, their Napoleon's Code, for their Code Civil, which has inspired civil law throughout the world. And there are differences between civil law and common law. And those things are really helpful to understand those distinctions. Even for us as Caribbean practitioners, we have jurisdictions like St. Lucia. St. Lucia is a hybrid. It uses some aspects of it as civil law inspired, and other aspects are common law. So understanding how civil law operates actually assists, and then also understanding how people approach the law. So whereas those of us from common law traditions, we have a certain reverence for case law, and we think about what the Supreme Court decided and how they interpret it. Those who are from a Code Civil culture, it is very different, where they're very much based on what the text says. So very different approaches in many ways to statutory interpretation, contractual interpretation, and understanding the two really helps one to be, I would say, more rounded attorney.
for sure. And even as you're mentioning that, like that carried me back to that might have been first year of my master's, where we were talking about the difference between common law and droit commun, which in French, if you translate it, it literally translates to common law, but it's a completely different legal system, although the words are the exact same. So again, yet another way that language and understanding language helps us to understand the differences in nuance between one particular ideology versus another. So many benefits that can be gained. So one final thing that I would like for you to be able to share with not just me but with our viewers, being a man, I would go so far as to say being a black man, and the benefit of being an example for others through your path, your journey, for others coming up today, somebody who may be in secondary school, who may be in Form 3, thinking about, should I do a foreign language, should I do Spanish, should I do French, or is my unknown relative telling me, boy, don't study that because there's no benefit to be gained.
What are you gonna do with that?
What is it that you would say to someone who is in such a position as to why they should look to study Spanish, French, or both?
Yeah, I think when I was, as a student in secondary school, there's very much a stigma that if you're a boy, you do sciences and maths. And I did do those actually for Form 6. I did do biology and chemistry, and Spanish and French. I did an extra subject. But I think if I had to give advice to someone, I would say, first of all, do what you genuinely like, what you're passionate about. The subjects you study in secondary school can really help set you up for a career ahead. The vocabulary I learned in Form 3 is still vocabulary and grammar that I use day to day over 25 years later.
Right.
So really pick something that you're passionate about first of all, whether that is foreign languages or not. And if you're not passionate about foreign languages, that's okay. If you're passionate about something else, then pursue that.
Right.
Foreign languages, I think, are so important. And if it is you do have an interest in it, I would encourage anyone, and in particular young men. We don't have that many young men. I don't know if you recall what the statistics are, like UE, the foreign language program.
I didn't go to UE.
Okay,
but I mean, I can think about Form 6.
Form 6, right?
I was
Even
the only
Form
boy
6.
in French class.
Same,
10
right?
students, 9 girls, 1 boy.
Right, and I think, it's I don't know what's the rationale for it. It may be, the skills that are required for foreign languages. Maybe there's some empirical data to support why it is there's that imbalance between men and women studying it. But what I would say to young men in particular is, by all means, pursue what you love, and if you're interested in it, do it. There are definitely benefits from a career perspective for doing it. We're living in a globalized world where being able to communicate in a foreign language brings with it a premium in terms of one's remuneration and ability to rise up the career ladder. So for me, doing foreign languages helped me, for example, to get that placement in Madrid. Many clients, I'm able to secure in Latin America because I'm able to speak their language. And I think if that's something that appeals to you, whether you want to go into teaching or not, and nothing's wrong with teaching. I mean, my first job was was teaching. I taught at Bishop Anstey for 1 year before going off to university. By far my most enjoyable job to date.
Okay.
Nothing's wrong with doing that, but there are so many opportunities out there with foreign languages, and they don't need to be on their own. One can study foreign languages alongside other studies, right? One could do foreign languages and then transfer.
Yes.
So, a very good friend of mine, I know went on to become a lawyer as well.
Right.
And she did foreign languages for her degree, full foreign languages, then did a 1-year conversion course to become a lawyer.
Right.
There's so many different options now.
Right.
So by all means, pursue the languages.
So as you say that, this is one thing I usually love to share with foreign languages, and why I try to promote foreign languages. I tell people all the time, foreign languages is the only field, the only profession that can be blended with any other profession that you can think of. So this is the example that I give. I tell people, take any profession, pick any profession in the world. Just imagine, doctor, lawyer. Take that profession and now add the prefix bilingual.
Yeah.
Bilingual doctor. You still have all the benefits of being a doctor, but now you could apply that in more places, in more contexts, in more fields. look a lawyer. We have a living example right here. Being able to speak more than one language gives him access to many other opportunities that other people who are in his profession cannot achieve because they do not have that advantage. So at least for me, that is the one benefit that I try to tell people that languages has over any other field in the world. So to close off, we are trying to introduce a new practice moving forward. So our last guest, which was DK Noel, he had a question that he left for our next guest, which is you. And his question was this.
So to the next person, whoever he or she may be, what will you tell your teenage self if you had the opportunity now to do so?
Oh, that's a hard one. Thanks, DK. What would I tell my teenage self? I'm not sure there's much I would want to change about my teenage years, but I think what I would say to any teenager, and I guess also to myself included, is really try to ensure that as much as you're having fun in these teenage years, they do actually count later on, and do apply yourself in whatever field you're interested in. It doesn't have to be something academically inclined, but whatever your passions are, allow yourself to be drawn to that and really start focusing on that from this age. There's no reason why you should wait for later on. But that would be the first bit, and the second bit would be have fun in everything. What's the point of life? As much as you want to really apply yourself, but also make time for fun. Yeah.
Right, really good, Thank you. Okay, and to close off now, we're going to be asking you to do the same. So you could just have a look in the camera. And a question for our next guest, whoever that will be.
Okay, so question for our next guest, whoever that may be. If your life were a movie and there was an audience looking on, what would they be screaming at the screen? What is so obvious that you need to be doing in your life that anyone looking on could tell you, but you're not noticing?
Really good one. Great one. Right. So, Jivaan, thanks again. Thank you so much.
Thanks very much, Jason.
I really appreciate it. Thank you for sharing your knowledge, your expertise. And until next time.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Take
Merci.
care.